Let me introduce our next speaker, Robert Woodson, who is the founder and president of the Woodson Center. He is also the founder and president of two other organizations, 1776 Unites and Voices of Black Mothers United. Mr. Woodson founded the Woodson Center in 1981 to help residents of low-income neighborhoods address the problems of their communities. And this is something that I am a huge fan of, having grown up in inner city Oakland and having grown up in a neighborhood that was full of crime and poverty. I hear conservatives talk a lot about getting government out of the lives of the people who live in these communities. And I agree with that, but oftentimes there aren't a whole lot of people offering solutions to the members of those communities, offering solutions for renewal, for progress. And so, I am in particular a fan of anybody who goes into those communities and actually helps to make them better by allowing these communities to help themselves. Mr. Woodson is also a former civil rights activist. He has headed the National Urban League Department of Criminal Justice, has also been a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, and he is referred to by many as the godfather of the neighborhood empowerment movement. He is an early MacArthur Genius Awardee and the recipient of the 2008 Bradley Prize. And then he's also received the Presidential Citizens Award and a 2008 Social Entrepreneurship Award from the Manhattan Institute. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I will take probably a different tack than what I've heard. My early civil rights experience has sort of informed me a lot. I led demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, a city 30 miles west of Philadelphia, the home of Bayard Rustin. People don't realize that when Dr. King and Rustin came through different cities, they brought the media attention and we were able to present local issues. But after the death of Dr. King, we were leading demonstrations outside of a pharmaceutical company. And when they desegregated, they hired 9 Black PhD chemists. And when we approached them to join our movement, they refused and said they got these jobs because they were qualified. When this happened several times, I realized that the civil rights movement, when the doors are open, not all people could walk through. Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the right to eat in a restaurant of your choosing or living in a neighborhood if you don't have the means to exercise that right? So I realized that just having opportunity wasn't enough, that people needed to be prepared to walk through. And I realized at that point too, that it was a real split in the Black community, that many of the civil rights leaders went on to become elected officials. They were the ones also administering the $22 trillion we spent on poverty programs, where 70% of it went to the people to serve the poor. So we created a commodity out of poor people. And so I left that movement then until now, realizing that I had to work among low-income people of all races, that low-income people, whether they're Asian, Hispanic, they have more in common with their peers who are also in that class than sometimes they have in common with their middle class and upper income counterparts. So I have been working on behalf of low-income people. To me, those are the people. And so I bring that perspective to this issue of crime and violence. If you look at the numbers, more Blacks are killed in 1 year today than 50 years of the Klan. More Blacks. 6,000 children are killed. 70% of those are Black children, and these are killed by other Blacks. So this is a problem that is spreading. But what troubles me a little bit as we look for solutions, when I read the response of the White House to the Asian violence, what is it that this task force proposed? Equity, justice, and opportunity, access to federal contracts, increased federal workforce, diversity, outreach, and engagement. My question is, what do those remedies that are perhaps unjust, what do that have to do with improving the safety of people in these communities? You know, and as a consequence, anytime you generalize about a group, all Asians or all Blacks, and then you try to apply remedies without disaggregating that population, it always ends up helping those that are better educated and that are not living in vulnerable communities at the expense of those who are living in vulnerable communities. I'll give you an example of with the women's movement. The women's movement started as a consequence of a Black woman in Harlem wanting to give her peers a voice about abuse. Okay, so other women joined it. It became the Me Too movement. And then the emphasis did not shifted more to class than it did issues. And so then the women's movement got defined as, so what were the solutions for women? More appointments to boards of directors, more jobs. In other words, these are remedies that help those women at the top end at the expense of those at the bottom. At the same time, Geraldo Ribeiro did a 2-hour special about the sexual rape and women in prisons for 2 hours. Every one of the women that were sexually assaulted was Black. Every perpetrator was Black. But yet it did not provoke a single debate or discussion, nor was there any outcry coming from, because it did not fit the racial narrative. And that's my claim. So it seems to me that when we are considering remedies, I think we have to disaggregate dealing with general discrimination and the increasing in federal contracts and all of that. I don't see how that remedy relates to the problem of abuse of people in these communities. What I think, what we have done at the Woodson Center is we first of all went into the communities suffering the problem and asked the people there what were their priorities. We found in the Black communities, while the progressives were defunding the police of Black Lives Matter, 80% of the Black community is against defunding the police. 60% of Black surveys said they didn't believe that racial discrimination was a principal barrier to their flourishing. And so what we did was go in and give voice to the thousands of mothers who lost children to homicide. And they came up with ways to prevent. So my point is, in order to address this problem, it seems to me that rather than coming up with remedies that are coming on high from the White House or from other issues, that we parachute into these communities opportunities that have to do with employment contracts and that's one set of issues, but that must be separated from making vulnerable people less vulnerable. And how do you do that? Well, what we have done, for instance, is going into those communities and realizing that there was a moral and spiritual dimension to this. So I won't take the time to go into detail. We have something called violence-free zone, where we go into the community suffering a problem, recruit young adults in there whose lives have been redeemed and transformed. Maybe they're former predators. And we have empowered them to reach out to the young people in that community, to witness to them and bring them into a peace pact. We went into a community that was 55 gang murders in a 5 square block area in 2 years. By organizing people in that community, we were able to take these small groups of young people who were creating the terrorism and turn them around and make them ambassadors of peace. And so you saw large-scale reductions in violence within that community. In Bensonhurst, New Jersey, for instance, some years ago, the Hasidic Jews in those communities came together with Black Muslims who were supposed to be there because their greatest threat were the Black drug dealers. So these indigenous civic groups came together to aid and support one another. And as a consequence, they were able to drive the drug dealers out. It seems to me that part of our strategy for reducing violence has to promote greater cooperation among civic organizations in these low-income communities. Sometimes small Black churches and others can come together because they have more in common. Both Asians and Blacks are being terrorized primarily by Blacks. And I agree with you as saying that there needs to be more truth in reporting of these crimes. That I can almost tell anytime that an Asian is assaulted and they don't mention the race of the perpetrator, I know it's a Black person. I know that. But also we must speak up in support of law enforcement because there is a strong correlation between reduced policing by demonizing the police. We are strong supporters of law enforcement. Our Voices of Black Mothers United have partnership events all over the country where the police are invited in to work with local groups to promote the safety of. So I think those of us who are supposed to be anti-violence, we must be strong supporters of law enforcement and be very explicit about that. And we should push back against anyone that tries to racialize this. And at the only time there is outrage is when the perpetrator is Black or where the perpetrator is white. We don't have a race problem in that degree. What we do have a civic crisis, a moral and spiritual freefall that is really demonizing human life to the point where young people no longer value their own life, to the point where even in Silicon Valley, the leading cause of death among teenagers is suicide, the highest rate in the country. Among low-income whites in Appalachia, it's prescription drugs and it's homicide in the inner city. Each of those groups have more in common to help fill that emptiness in the lives of people. And so if we want to reduce crimes, I think we've got to get together with civic institutions with inside and begin to fund strategies that are being designed by people in those communities to address the needs of their young people in the community. But it's an inside strategy, and we have models of around the country. In fact, I'll be on Fox Saturday night with Lawrence Jones's show, along with a few others, giving some examples of where and how these interventions in these urban centers are working to reduce violence inside. And hopefully we can partner with people in the Asian community who are similarly situated, who want to see solutions coming from within the community. Asians and Blacks should be protecting one another and coming together and partnering with others, but because they share a common enemy.